Introduction. On April 28, 2025, the Iberian Peninsula experienced the most severe power outage in its history. Spain and Portugal plunged into a blackout, traffic lights went dark, trains halted, hospitals switched to emergency power, and airports reverted to manual systems. Mobile networks and internet services failed in many areas. A cascading failure began, crippling the high-voltage grid in just 6 seconds, triggered by a chain reaction of automated protection systems. Initial speculation pointed to a cloud cover that supposedly disrupted record-breaking solar output. However, EUMETSAT satellite data revealed clear skies over the photovoltaic (PV) regions of Extremadura, Andalusia, and Castilla-La Mancha. The trigger lay within the grid itself. A defect, possibly in a solar complex, caused protection mechanisms to amplify instability. The power link to France disconnected, isolating the peninsula and turning it into an unstable island grid. Lacking inertia, the grid frequency collapsed, leading to a total blackout. Why does this matter? Over 55 million people were affected, with nearly 100% of households in Spain and 85% in Portugal losing power. Critical infrastructure failed, and at least 4 people died, some due to malfunctioning ventilators. Economic damages could reach €1 billion. The blackout exposes vulnerabilities in renewable energy grids. Without inertia, storage, or adapted protection systems, a minor trigger can topple everything. This essay reconstructs the sequence of events, debunks the weather myth, and draws lessons for robust, green grids. April 28, 2025, was a wake-up call. 1. Collapse in seconds, a log of lost control. The blackout of April 28, 2025, was not a gradual failure but a collapse within seconds, driven by a system optimized for efficiency at the expense of resilience. Based on data from Spain's grid operator RE and weather analyses, this log details how a modern power grid fell in 6 seconds. 12 hours and 32 minutes, the first domino falls. A voltage drop in southwest Spain, possibly due to a fault in a grid coupling, hits an overloaded network. Extremadura feeds record solar power into the grid, but inertial sources like hydropower are minimal.
Kindheit und
Without
frühe
buffers,
Jahre.
the grid begins to falter. 1 second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 1 second, protection becomes a trap. PV plants detect frequency fluctuations. Their protection circuits simultaneously disconnect up to 15 gigawatts of capacity. Instead of stabilizing the grid, this triggers a nationwide undersupply. The frequency drops in real time. Another second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 2 seconds, critical threshold. The frequency falls below 49 Hz, well under the 50 Hz standard. Protection systems disconnect plants and substations. Each disconnection accelerates the downward spiral in a grid lacking inertia. Another second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 3 seconds, isolation. The connection to France, the last stabilizing link, is severed. Spain and Portugal become an island grid, solely responsible for their stability. Without inertia, collapse looms. Another second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 4 seconds, free fall. The frequency plummets to 47.9 Hz. Load shedding switches cut off consumers, but it's too late. Without rotating generators, there's no buffer. Electronic controls react swiftly, but offer no salvation. Another second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 5 seconds, blackout. The grid collapses entirely. All lines and generators are disconnected. The blackout protection saves only individual components, not the system. Spain and Portugal are without power. Another second later, 12 hours 32 minutes and 6 seconds, darkness. Traffic lights go out, trains stop, elevators trap passengers. Hospitals struggle with backup power. Ventilators fail, and in Badajoz, a child is manually resuscitated. Thousands of small tragedies unfold in this moment. 2. Clouds ruled out, satellite evidence. Was a cloud cover the trigger? EUMETSAT satellite images at this time show clear skies over Spain's solar parks. No shadows, no gradual power drop, just an abrupt collapse. Weather stations report stable solar radiation. The fault lay in the system itself. 3. Recovery, the return of light. After the blackout, recovery began at 1500 hours Central European summer time. Pumped storage plants started island grids, gradually synchronized. By 1900 hours, a major supply block was active. By midnight, 60% of Spain's and 90% of Portugal's demand was met. By 9 o'clock on April 29, 99.95% of demand was restored. A remarkable feat, but prevention could have avoided it. 4. Lessons from system failure. How could the blackout have been prevented? The Iberian blackout was no accident but a warning, a system failure under real conditions. What could have prevented it? We analyze 4 critical levers: technical, structural, regulatory, and conceptual. 4.1 Inertia remains essential. A stable grid requires rotating mass, known as grid inertia, generated by the spinning components of traditional generators like steam, gas, nuclear, or hydropower plants. This inertia acts as a buffer. When loads shift suddenly, such as during a generator failure, kinetic energy stabilizes the frequency. Modern PV and wind plants, connected via inverters, provide little inertia. They are flexible and efficient but vulnerable to fluctuations. Without physical mass, the grid cannot cushion sudden disruptions. The European Grid Association ENTSOE recommends that 20 to 25% of power come from inertial sources. On April 28, 2025, this figure on the Iberian Peninsula was likely below 10%, a critical risk that materialized that day. The lesson is clear: even in renewable systems, inertia is vital, whether from conventional plants, nuclear plants, hydropower, or emerging technologies that create virtual inertia. 4.2 Battery storage, from option to obligation. Battery storage is key to stable grids. It can respond to frequency fluctuations in milliseconds, supplying or absorbing energy to mimic inertia. This concept, called grid forming, allows storage and inverters to act like traditional generators, supporting voltage and frequency. In 2025, however, few Spanish large-scale plants had such systems. Economic factors: storage was seen as an expensive add-on, and the lack of regulatory mandates were to blame. This is a failure. In systems with fluctuating inputs, storage must be mandatory, especially in PV-heavy regions like Extremadura. In the long term, storage can do more: provide balancing energy, ensure emergency supply, and become economically viable with supportive policies. 4.3 Grid architecture, moving beyond the electrical island. The Iberian Peninsula's weak connection to Europe's grid was a central factor. Links to France and Morocco are technically and politically limited. Spain is often called Europe's electrical island, a vulnerability starkly exposed in 2025. When the French connection severed, the peninsula lost its main stabilizing lifeline. Spain and Portugal had to maintain stability alone, impossible without inertia or redundancy. Expanding grid interconnections to France and adding internal buffer lines in Spain are critical. Cellular grid structures, decentralized, self-stabilizing segments, could also prevent cascades. 4.4 Regulation, stability as a collective task. Current regulations for power plants focus on feed-in, safety, and emissions, not system stability, which is left to grid operators. In a decentralized system, this is insufficient. PV and wind plants must provide system services like frequency support or emergency power. This requires rules that reward such services and mandate standards, such as black start capability. Training for operating staff is equally vital. Software-driven plants demand skilled teams whose actions are documented and traceable, not for control, but for quality assurance. Interim conclusion. The blackout was not a fluke but a stress test revealing flaws in a system transformed too quickly without adequate architecture. The technologies for stable, green grids exist. What's missing are binding rules and an awareness of the physical logic behind the energy transition. 5. Conclusion. April 28, 2025, will go down as a turning point in energy history, not as a failure, but as a lesson. The blackout reveals where modern, renewable grids can falter: lack of inertia, storage, and grid connections. It wasn't technological backwardness but the result of a complex, imbalanced system unable to handle a minor trigger. The silver lining: this incident shows what matters. Power supply is a network, technical, political, societal. Inertia, storage, and international connections are not luxuries but foundations. The energy transition is necessary and feasible, but it demands stability, not just growth. Policies fixated on expansion while ignoring grid dynamics risk further cascades. April 28 was not a setback but a wake-up call. The future of energy lies in understanding and systemic transformation. Only then will the transition be green and resilient.